All right, greetings everybody. My name is Steve Weissmann from Tumbleweed Tiny House Company. And this is something new for all of us. I've never done a webinar this way. On my end, my video feed is stopping. I hope you're at least seeing this and certainly hearing it. So one of the things we're doing today is we are going to be giving away a free set of plans. I'm going to explain how to get them both in the beginning and in the end of this seminar. Today we're talking about the do's and don'ts of building a DIY tiny house. Okay, so to get the free plans, go to tumbleweedhouses.com/free, all lowercase. Tumbleweedhouses.com/free, all lowercase. And I'm getting some things that people can't hear me. And I think I'm having some issues here on my end because nothing's happening. Can you hear me? Thanks. Somebody posted a link, tumbleweedhouses.com/free. The coupon code is free. You will get a free set of plans. Those plans are about 90 pages long. They're a very, very detailed set of plans. And it's maybe you don't even want to build this tiny house. You're just thinking about your own. I really want to encourage you to get these plans and study them. So these are for personal use only. If you are a business and want to build a tiny house, you can't build this plan, but you certainly can look at them and learn from them. All right. So, obviously we build ready-made houses. So why am I talking about DIY builds? When Tumbleweed started, we built maybe one house a year. When we first started, it was very much like a DIY build. We didn't know what we were doing in the sense that we didn't have a ton of experience either. And over the years, we started doing workshops, and I spoke with hundreds of people who were interested in building tiny houses, people who built tiny houses. I have talked with so many people who built a DIY, asked them all types of questions, what they would do differently, and actually got to go inside about 20 different DIY builds and really talk to them about what they did. And so I've been able to get all of that experience together and talk through it. And one of the things I learned is that there's 4 distinct phases of building a tiny house and 1 hidden phase. So the first part is designing your tiny house. This is a very personalized part, and most people spend, I would say, a year planning their tiny house, and that's absolutely normal. The next is setting up your build spot. You've got to gather your materials and tools, then you got to build it. And the one part that people forget is paying for it. So those are the 5 components that really go into building a tiny house. So what goes wrong when people build tiny houses is, 1, things don't fit as planned. Even if you are an architect, if this is your first design, it is almost 100% certainty that at least 1 to 2 things will not fit as planned, and you will be making adjustments through the build process. The other thing is that people don't always have the skills, and they learn that along the way. And I hear a lot, it was way harder than I thought. And the thing that often goes wrong is people run out of money partway through the build. People who succeed consistently say these things. They enlisted their friends to help them. They had their budget clearly planned out, and they had a work schedule, and they stuck to it. The other thing, and it's not a rule, but as a generalization, people who succeeded, their current living situation really was sucky. They hated it, and they were really, really motivated to move out and get something going that they wanted to see happen. So just to review again, there's the distinct phases. You design your tiny house, you get your build spot for it, you gather materials and tools, and then you start building it. And don't forget, you have to pay for it. So let's talk about this. Your first place you need to do is you need to get a spot to build your tiny house. And you can either build it in a backyard, in a driveway, in a field, all of these, in a parking lot. All of those have happened before. When we first started building tumbleweeds, we were building them in backyards. Somebody who came to one of our workshops built theirs in a driveway. There was a wall and a fence, and they had a couple feet on each side. That was probably the least ideal situation I had heard of. Typically, you're going to want lots of space on the long ends, and you don't need a lot of space on the hitch and the license end. You need the space on the long end because you have to assemble your walls, put your walls up, and there's just more work done on the outside on those areas. This is for getting the outside of the house done. Once you're onto the inside, the space is not as important, but I would say it's about 1,000 square feet that we use when we build a tiny house. You're going to need tools and a place to store them. And this is something most people don't realize, is the amount of tools you need is not a small number. If you had no tools and you were to start building a tiny house tomorrow, estimate that you would spend $3,000 to $5,000 just to buy the tools you need. You're also going to need materials, right? And the materials for a tiny house, realistically, for a finished one, run anywhere from $15,000 to $50,000. I have heard and spoken to people who run that whole gamut. If they're doing $15,000, they're probably using a lot of repurposed materials. And if it's at the 50, it's all new and they have a really high-end build. You also have to enlist the help of friends or paid contractors. This is not a project you're going to do alone. When we build a custom tiny house at Tumbleweed, we're spending about 1,150 hours from start to finish, from design to gathering the materials to build it. So if you were one person working 40 hours a week by yourself, it would take you 6.5 months to build a custom tiny house. And keep in mind that we're experienced in doing this, and you aren't likely, so it very well could take you longer. I've heard people say, and I know from our experience, we built houses anywhere from 750 to 1,500 hours. 750 to 1,500 hours. This is something that most people, it blows their mind. I hear it again and again. Oh, there's no way I'm going to do this way faster. And you can, but then you're making sacrifices. And so typically what happens is, when you're going along with your tiny house and you're budgeting your time, and let's just say your budget is, I'm going to do this every weekend for 10 hours a day, and you really want to do a perfect job, it's going to take you 2 years to build. It's something you need to plan for. So enlisting the help of friends is a really, really key component. What happens is that people get tired by the end, and there's a lot of little things that never get finished in tiny houses. Whether it's that porch light, or it's often the cabinets don't get finished, the shelving doesn't get finished. Instead, what happens is under the kitchen counter, you see a lot of curtains. So maybe they had plans for cabinets and the curtains came in. It's funny, I don't think I've ever spoken with a DIY builder that has said everything is done. They'll always point out, oh yes, we still have to do this and this and this. And 3 years later, it's still the same thing. And they basically learn to live with it. I see a lot of people asking about the free plans. So I will repeat again, and then I will circle back at the end and spend more time on how to do that and give some screenshots in case you can't figure it out now. So the page on the website is tumbleweedhouses.com/free, all lowercase, tumbleweedhouses.com/free, and the coupon code is free. And it is the Linden, and the Linden is one of our older designs. It's designed for a utility trailer between the wheels, and I'm going to speak about that a little more later. Even if you don't want to build this house, check out these plans, download them, study them. We're all at home, and it's just really fun to see the amount of detail that one can put into thinking of a tiny house. The Linden is a bare bone house, and if you were to build it, I'd estimate about 750 hours to 800 for that house. So we talked a little bit about what can go wrong and the number of hours it takes. There's also certain things that consistently tend to cause problems on a tiny house. We've built hundreds of these. The customers calling back about specific issues again and again and again. And I'm going to sum it up into 3 things: crooked, mold, on demand. Crooked, mold, on demand water heaters. So houses get crooked. And let's talk about it. You're making a house on a foundation that is not a concrete foundation. It's on a trailer. And a trailer, especially in the beginning, not really designed to carry the load of a tiny house. When we built our first one, we bought a standard utility trailer and just built on top of that. And over the years, I'm going to say that the tiny house trailers have come such a magnificent way that there's so many great things about them. But let's imagine that you're building a tiny house and you're going to move it. And you're going to move it sometime. You're going to wind up driving it for 2 days somewhere else in the country. So you're going to be putting this house through 20 hours of earthquake and hurricane, especially if it's raining, all in one shot. And you've got to design for that. You've got to put your hurricane ties in your roof. You've got to mount it to the trailer very, very well. And trailers, this is a tricky part about trailers and how much your house is going to weigh and pulling your house. As a basic rule, I would say that a house weighs 400 to 450 pounds for every foot, plus the weight of the trailer. So if I was building a 20-foot house, it would be 8,000 to 9,000 pounds just for the house, plus the weight of the trailer, which is probably another 1,500 pounds. So you're looking at about 10,000 pounds for a 20-foot. If I was building a 30-foot, I can use the same calculation and get my weights. You've got to know before you start building how much your house is going to weigh. The typical DIY build is going to be more than a typical shop-built house, because I've seen DIY builders want to use things that weigh a lot more. They're going to wind up using marble, tile, sheetrock is very heavy. They're not necessarily going to use the lightweight wood on the exterior as well. Like I've seen shingles, which weigh more. And you got to keep all that in mind. And so something else that's so important when you're towing your tiny house, if you don't think about this in advance, when you drive, it's going to do this. It's going to wave on the road. And why does that happen? The typical trailer is built like this. Here's my hitch and here's my license plate. And the wheels are at a 60-40 split. Now, if I had a box and I just built a box and I did not put anything inside of it, this is going to be just fine. I have seen tiny houses that put the weight at a 70-30. I've seen them at a 50-50. You want to think about where you adjust. At Tumbleweed, we always put our loft end on this side. As a result, we've actually moved our wheels this direction a little bit to compensate for that. Imagine for a minute if your bathroom, your loft, and your kitchen are all on this end, and this side's completely empty. What's going to happen is you have a lot more weight here, and it goes like this on the truck. And when it goes like this, it wobbles. If you have too much weight here, it comes off the hitch, and it wobbles as well. Really, the only way we've seen to balance that out when you're traveling would be something like you put sandbags in one spot or the other. If your house is overweight and it's not moving, it's pretty much irrelevant, because let's say that your weight for the house is rated at 10,000, and that's called GVWR, gross vehicle weight rating. That means that more than 10,000 pounds shouldn't be on these wheels at any given time. Once you put this down and you maybe put your other things, you're totally fine. The other thing you can look at, because especially if you're buying a used trailer, and I see a lot of people buying used trailers, maybe they're going to even get a non-tiny house trailer. They're going to find like an old RV trailer and use that. If you look at the wheels and count those lugs, you are going to learn a lot. So as a general rule, if you've got 5 lugs in that wheel, that means that axle is probably rated for 3,500 pounds. And there's probably going to be 2 of them. So that's 7,000 pounds. It's not enough for your tiny house. You need to see wheels that have at least 6 lugs. If they have 6 lugs, it's probably a 5,000 pound capacity. And if they have 8 lugs, it's going to be 7,000 or 8,000 pounds per axle. And that's what you want to be looking for. We've built and still do build tiny houses with 2 wheels and with 3 wheels on each side. The 3 wheels you have to do to tow the weight, but if you're really going to be driving around the country, I would advise against. You're going to get a lot more uneven tire wear, and it just doesn't turn as well. Another thing that's important to know about the trailer is what's called camber. So when we were building tiny house trailers, this is a completely over-exaggerated photo, but we actually bent the trailer like this as we made them. The reason we did that is when you're driving, all the weight's right, you got the support here and not here, and as the house is bouncing, it will turn it into a frown over years. So we put this camber in there, and maybe it's a half an inch in the middle, and it's hard to build on. You had to weight it down. Also, the 2 sides never really came out even. It was very common for them to be off by 1/8 of an inch, and that would throw off DIY builders. I'm going to guess that most DIY trailers are probably flat. And that can be an issue over the years. We actually now build on a flat trailer, and I'm going to show you a bad picture of how we do that, but we do that by putting 3 components together so that we don't have one 30-foot piece of steel. We break them into 10-foot sections. Okay, so the next issue is mold in a tiny house. And mold is coming from a lot of things. So let's talk about what mold is and where it comes from. It's water. It's basically standing water in your house. And the water is coming into your house in a few different ways. I think most people assume it's coming from a leak from the outside. That can happen. It can also come from a leak from the inside, which is more common. And it also comes from people and pets. We've had somebody with 5 full-time pets in their house 24/7, and they had some serious mold issues because all of the animals were constantly putting moisture into the air. Moisture also comes in huge volumes from propane. So if you are on a propane stove, you will have a lot of moisture in your air. It comes from crooked, and crooked comes from your foundation. If your house isn't level, or your house starts to torque as you drive, it will twist and turn, and your doors and windows will eventually get little air gaps, and those air gaps will let moisture in. That's how that gets into your house. When I look at a tiny house, I don't see it as you can make a tiny house that is mold-free. What you're trying to do is you're trying to make it where you mitigate the chances that mold will actually happen. So a couple things that are really, really important. One is a bathroom fan. And 2, and I recommend this, and we put it in all of our houses now, is an air exchanger. An air exchanger, whether you're there or not, is constantly circulating the air. So how does mold happen? And we've all seen this picture of condensation. And condensation is the first step in most cases, unless you've got a severe drip, of how mold's going to happen. Here I've got a glass of water. I got some ice cubes, and I've got water in the glass. My water is 32 degrees. My outside temperature is 80 degrees. What happens to the glass is that this glass is going to become 40 degrees. Let's just say that the dew point, which means that the point at which the water in the air, which is in the gas state, condenses and turns to water on your glass, is 40 degrees. Sorry, it's 42 degrees. So now my glass is 40. It's collecting all that water and air, and now it's becoming wet on my glass. That is how condensation happens. So when I'm in a tiny house and I've got a window and my interior temperature is nice and warm and my exterior temperature is 32 degrees and the interior pane of glass gets to about 40 degrees, I'm going to have water beat up on my window. It can happen on your window. It can happen on metal surfaces. It can happen on your trailer under your floor, and it can happen inside the walls if you've got metal inside the walls. And tiny houses are going to have those metal plates inside the walls. So those are the hidden sources that's going to happen. I absolutely, completely say, please do not put aluminum windows. You are sure to have problems with that. So again, to mitigate the mold, if you don't need propane, go with electric. Go with an air exchanger, and then a bathroom fan. A bathroom fan you turn on when you're using the bathroom. An air exchanger, and if you're looking for recommendation, Lunos is something we use. It goes up in a wall in the house, and every hour it comes on, it takes some of the moisture out and brings the dry air back into your house. And they probably have about a 50% recovery on the heat. The other issue that we see a lot of issues with is on-demand water heaters. And I know that everybody really wants an on-demand water heater. If you put a regular water heater in your tiny house, you're taking up way too much space. So the on-demand ones are great because they're small. 2 problems. One, they run on propane. We've already discussed that propane can create mold. The other is that they fail regularly, and pipes in tiny houses freeze constantly. It's a regular thing. The pipes in tiny houses freeze a lot because often the foundation is not as well insulated, and the pipes are inside the walls, in the walls of the house. When we build a tiny house now, we actually run the water. It's not in the walls anymore. We run it in the toe kicks on the ground on the floor, so they're actually getting the ambient air inside the house. But if you were to leave your house and turn it off, they will freeze. When it freezes, your water heater will break. Other issues are they're just finicky. There's usually some sort of chemical, like a glycerol chemical, that is heating the water. There's a lot of measurements, and you've got to think about this. These things are, getting shipped and bounced around in a tiny house. They're in pretty much every climate imaginable, and typically certain things work better in certain climates. So it has to be adjusted for your altitude. It could have to be adjusted for the time of the year. It's a lot of maintenance, and really you should be checking on it every few months. So those are the three things that typically don't work well: is crooked, mold, on demand. All right, so now materials for a tiny house. People are getting materials. One of the things that I've heard from people do often is they start gathering their materials a year in advance, and I love that idea. I know the people who've done that have been incredibly, incredibly successful. Where can you go to get those materials? There's a place called the Restore, Habitat for Humanity Restore. There's other places that just have free materials. You can go to construction sites. I've heard people do that. One thing I would suggest is your windows. If you can get, windows are very expensive, so if you can get used windows, that's really great. It will help to know the sizes before you do your build, because you can plan around your windows. Here are the main things that I think work really well for going out and getting used stuff: windows, doors, trailer, roofing, and flooring. You can buy remnants, you can go used on those. The things that you really don't want to go used on, obviously, are things like studs, insulation. Your interior wall boards, they don't need to all match. A word of caution: if you are using repurposed lumber, and let's say you've got this old fence, beautiful old fence, doesn't mean it's not safe. We've had customers ship their fence to us to say, we want to use this in a tiny house, and we get it, and there's mold in the fence. And that's not how you want to start your tiny house. You don't want to take something that's moldy and put it in. So do watch out for that. One of the things I mentioned was enlisting the help of friends. So when it comes to this, you can think of them helping you in two ways. One is they can help you build. The other is they can help you with your tools. It's amazing. They want to help you with their tools. You do not need to own all the tools. You can borrow tools from friends on a regular basis. If you start putting the word out, hey, I'm building a tiny house. I need some help. Do you have these tools? You will get a lot of responses. So what about buying a tiny house shell, one that's already started? People definitely do that. I think they feel that the hardest thing is getting started on their build, and that's the hard part. I will tell you that that's the conception, but in reality, probably the interior is the hardest part. Plumbing, electrical, and interior finish take the most skill. Framing a house does not. If you want to buy a tiny house shell and you're going to buy one new, there's three things you need to have before you do that. You need to have your windows planned, because if you're going to buy your own windows, you need to know what sizes you want. You need to know your design, because you're going to have somebody build it for you. It needs to meet your design. And obviously, you have to decide if you're going to buy it new or used, because if you're buying it used, you can get a good price, right? You find somebody else who either started a tiny house and didn't finish it, or bought a shell and never got to it. My word of caution is this: if it's been sitting for a year and it hasn't been what's called dried in. So dried in means that the exterior is finished. The boards can get damp and start to expand a little bit. And you can have a couple of issues. So you may have to replace a few of the boards. Not a big deal, but take a look out for that. So one of the cool things that came along now is certification. I can see I'm running low on time, so I'm going to be real fast on self-certification here, and then I'll circle back to how to get the plans again. So self-certification. I love that it's available, and I understand it's not for everybody. There are a few types of tiny houses. The self-certification is on a travel trailer park model. That means if it's on wheels, it's available. If it's not on wheels, don't even think about should I or shouldn't I. If you're building on a foundation, you absolutely have to, because the zoning department and building department can basically condemn your house. If it's a tiny house on wheels, it's more likely they're just going to say, hey, you need to move it or you need to get it certified. So most tiny house builders don't. There's two companies that do it, NOAA and PWA. I've heard great things about both of them. I've spoken with both of them. Very, very excited they do that for people. So why would you or why wouldn't you? It's really a matter of cost. I mean, if it was free, I would say go ahead and do it. Although sometimes you want to build a tiny house that doesn't even meet the codes, and that's okay for you, and that's going to work for you. What happens if your tiny house doesn't meet code? Basically, it's a zoning issue. If it doesn't meet code, the zoning department can say your tiny house doesn't meet code, and you've got X number of days to move it, and that's usually 30. And typically that only happens when a neighbor complains. They don't go out looking for this. It would be a neighbor complaint. And that's the zoning department. And so it's very possible that where you're at, whether you build it to code or not, doesn't really matter. But if you build it to code, really it's no different than putting, say, an Airstream in your backyard. All right, so I got a few minutes left. I'm going to try and share some screenshots for those of you who still haven't downloaded the plans. So what we're giving away is the Linden 20 building plans, and that's at tumbleweedhouses.com/free. I'm going to share that screen in case you haven't seen it. Let's see here, application. All right. So here are the building plans. It's really simple. You're just going to hit the add to cart button, and boom, you're done. Now, oh boy, how do I'm sorry guys, I am not sure how to get back to the next screen. So once you add to cart, you're going to go to the cart screen. I want to show the cart. Share screen. Here's the cart screen. Down in the bottom left, you'll see apply a coupon. You're going to just type in free, all lowercase. It's going to zero out the price. At the bottom, you have to agree to terms and conditions, and you will get this next page. You can download the plans, and you'll get an email to download the plans as well. If you are struggling with downloading these plans, we are going to be answering emails for the next 30 minutes or so. Support@tumbleweedhouses.com. Support@tumbleweedhouses.com. If you want us to give you a call, just include your phone number. Happy to call you and walk you through the process. All right, everybody, thank you for checking in, and hope you have fun looking at these plans. Bye-bye.